He made Muhammad Ali miss. He humbled George Foreman. And yet, Jimmy Young died broke, brain damaged, and forgotten. He wasn't knocked out by a punch, but by something far more brutal: corruption, neglect, and a system that never gave him the credit he earned. Because after the final bell, Jimmy didn't stop fighting. His greatest battles were the ones no fan ever saw. How does a man go from outsmarting legends to losing everything? To understand that, we have to go back to where it all started. Jimmy Young grew up in the unforgiving streets of Philadelphia, where hope didn't just vanish, it got beaten out of you. This wasn't just poverty. It was a daily fight to survive, surrounded by crime, noise, and the kind of pressure that crushes most kids before they even dream. He was one of 7 children packed into a cramped house, where food was limited, privacy didn't exist, and every day felt like a war between chaos and routine. In a place like that, dreams didn't just die, they were laughed at. School offered no answers, regular jobs promised nothing. But then came boxing, a glimmer of possibility that seemed to fit Young in a way nothing else ever could. He first stepped into the gym as a teenager, drawn in by the city's deep boxing tradition. The dimly lit gyms of Philly weren't glamorous, but they were sacred. They offered discipline, structure, and maybe, just maybe, a way out. That's where Jimmy found himself, lacing up gloves before he really knew what he was doing. From the first day, it was clear he wasn't like the other kids. While everyone else came in wild and swinging, trying to prove how tough they were, Jimmy was different. He was quiet, calculating. Instead of throwing bombs, he slipped them. From the start, his style was different. Most young boxers wanted to hit as hard as possible, but Jimmy was more interested in not getting hit at all. In a sport built on brutality, Jimmy Young chose survival, and that choice would define his entire life. But let's not sugarcoat it. His climb wasn't some Cinderella story. It was a long, bitter grind through the back alleys of boxing politics. From the start, promoters didn't see a future champion. They saw a stepping stone, a trial horse, a name to throw at their rising stars. Someone durable enough to last a few rounds, but not dangerous enough to ruin their plans. That was the role he was expected to play. But Jimmy wasn't interested in playing along. Even in defeat, he made prospects question themselves. Guys like Ernie Shavers and Ron Lyle came in expecting target practice. What they got was a masterclass in frustration. Young slipped their biggest punches, diffused their power, and made men known for destruction look clumsy and confused. He wasn't there to brawl. He was there to dissect. His defense was razor sharp, his timing surgical. Feints, shoulder rolls, subtle angles. He made chaos look controlled. The crowd didn't always appreciate it. He wasn't knocking guys out cold. But the boxing world took notice. Behind the scenes, insiders knew Jimmy Young was one of the most technically gifted and maddening opponents a fighter could face. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but he was smart, and in boxing, that can be far more dangerous. His defensive approach was almost scientific. See, in a sport defined by brutality, where most heavyweights relied on overwhelming strength, Jimmy brought a subtle genius to the ring. He'd stand just outside the danger zone, moving his head and shoulders so punches would graze air. He'd use his jab to keep bigger men at bay, then counter with sharp right hands when they overcommitted. Fans who appreciated technical boxing saw the genius in what he was doing. Critics, on the other hand, sometimes called his style boring because he didn't go for the knockout. But Jimmy didn't care about pleasing the judges or the crowd. He cared about surviving and winning, even if it wasn't flashy. By the mid-1970s, he had carved out something rare in boxing, a reputation built not on hype, but on proof. Quietly, methodically, he'd built a resume that insiders couldn't ignore. He wasn't the media darling, he wasn't the knockout artist. But ask any trainer who actually understood the sport, and they'd tell you, Jimmy Young was a nightmare matchup. His rematch with Ernie Shavers said it all. Many believed he'd clearly done enough to win, even though the judges ruled it a draw. It was just one more example of a pattern that would haunt him. Outbox the favorite, frustrate the puncher, and walk away empty-handed. He wasn't the kind of contender who made headlines, but in the back rooms where matchmakers and managers whispered, his name carried real weight. He was the guy you kept your prospect away from. Too risky, too crafty, too damn hard to look good against. But even respect in the shadows has its limits. If Young was going to break through, he needed one big moment, a spotlight too bright to ignore, an opponent so legendary that even boxing's politics couldn't deny him. And in 1976, he got it. Jimmy's name was thrown into the mix for a fight against none other than the greatest himself, Muhammad Ali. It wasn't just a fight, it was his shot at vindication. For most people, Ali was untouchable, a champion who'd already become a legend. But for Jimmy, it was the perfect test. He wasn't there to make up the numbers or give Ali an easy night. He wanted to prove that his style, his grit, and his skill could stand up to the best fighter on the planet. The stage was set for a showdown that nobody saw coming. On that night, the world would see whether Jimmy Young's quiet brilliance could rattle the greatest heavyweight of all time. April 30th, 1976. The Capitol Center in Maryland is packed. The lights are bright, and the world's eyes are on Muhammad Ali, ready to defend his heavyweight crown yet again. But across the ring stands Jimmy Young, a man most fans barely knew, but insiders quietly respected. This wasn't just another title defense. It was the night he would show the world what real ring intelligence looks like. The matchup looked lopsided on paper. Ali, the global superstar, weighed in at 230 pounds, 19 more than Young, who was in peak condition for a 27-year-old contender. Ali's reputation was untouchable, his confidence legendary. Young, meanwhile, was the quiet technician, always the underdog, fighting more for respect than for headlines. But from the opening bell, he let everyone know he wasn't there to play the role of a stepping stone. His plan was simple but not easy. Don't let Ali dictate the fight. Where most challengers fell into Ali's rhythm, Young refused to cooperate. He used constant movement, a high guard, and sharp counterpunches to keep him guessing. Ali would launch those famous combinations, but Young's head movement and footwork made him miss again and again. He found himself swinging at air, growing visibly frustrated as the rounds ticked by. What really set Young apart that night was how he forced Ali out of his comfort zone. Ali liked to let opponents come to him, then punish them with speed and timing. Young flipped the script, making Ali chase him and press the action, something the champion rarely had to do.
Right, that's what happened to Ron Lyle, and that's why Young beat him up. What is this kind of tackle? I never saw it.
For much of the fight, Ali looked confused and even a little lost. Young's defense wasn't just about survival, it was about control. He'd slip punches, fire back with quick flurries, and then reset before Ali could respond. According to post-fight reports, Young's relentless counters even left Ali battling a broken eardrum. It was a masterclass in ring generalship. Then there was his most debated tactic, ducking his head low and, when trapped on the ropes, slipping his upper body through them.
Countdown continues for round 12.
Come on, Howard, it couldn't be for the money only because he and Frazier had one heck of a fight.
That was Frazier against the end of the round. We'll talk more, King.
Some called it clever, a way to keep Ali from working him over in close. Others saw it as gamesmanship, maybe even unsportsmanlike. But in a world where survival means everything, Young did what he had to do. The referee intervened, sometimes even starting a count, but he never lost his cool. He used every tool at his disposal, and Ali simply couldn't solve the puzzle. So how did the fight end? By unanimous decision, in favor of Ali. The crowd? Stunned.
Muhammad Ali gets a unanimous decision as the heavyweight champion of the world, retains his title here in Landover, Maryland.
The judges' scores weren't just questionable, they were shockingly wide in favor of Ali. Most watching the fight that night couldn't believe what they were seeing. Even Ali's own trainer, Angelo Dundee, later remarked that it was Ali's worst fight. Boxing fans flooded TV stations with complaints. For many, it was obvious. Jimmy Young had done enough to win. Still, the decision stood. Ali kept his title, and Young was left with nothing but frustration and a growing sense that the system wasn't built for fighters like him. He'd outthought and outfought the greatest of all time, only to have the moment snatched away by judges who seemed more impressed by Ali's legend than by what actually happened in the ring. For Young, this wasn't just a loss, it was a turning point. He'd reached the mountaintop only to be shoved back down, and as he prepared for his next big fight, the weight of that injustice started to press in from all sides. What happens to a fighter when he gives everything, only for the judges to rip it away? The aftermath of a close defeat wasn't just another line on his record. It became a weight he carried everywhere. The psychological toll of those razor-thin losses started to show after the Ali fight, but it reached a breaking point when he faced Ken Norton in November 1977. This high-stakes eliminator went the full 15 rounds, unusual for a non-title match, reflecting what was on the line. The winner would move on to a heavyweight championship fight. This was another chance to shake off the sting of the Ali decision and finally claim the respect he'd fought so hard for. The fight itself was a chess match in gloves. Under the bright lights of Caesar's Palace, Norton brought his trademark aggression, digging into Young's ribs with heavy, relentless body shots. Young, ever the technician, boxed cleverly, drawing Norton onto sneak right-hand punches, slipping and countering with the kind of precision that had frustrated so many opponents before. Each round was a tug-of-war between brute force and ring IQ. Norton pressed forward, trying to break Young's rhythm. He stayed composed, picking his spots and refusing to be bullied. There was no clear winner as the rounds ticked by, just two men locked in a battle of wills and styles. When the final bell sounded, both fighters stood exhausted, waiting for the verdict. The announcement, split decision, Ken Norton, hit like a punch to the gut. Many observers argued that the decision favored the body punching over the boxing on that day, pointing out how the judges seemed to reward Norton's aggression more than Young's accuracy and defense. The crowd and commentators were divided. Some felt Young's clean counters and ability to neutralize Norton's attacks should have secured him the win. Others believed Norton's relentless pressure edged it for him, but for Young, it was déjà vu. A repeat of the Ali fight, where the work he'd done in the ring was overshadowed by the judges' subjective calls. This is where things go downhill. This loss stung even deeper than the Ali decision. With the championship shot now out of reach, Young was left to watch as Norton was awarded the WBC belt, not by beating the champion, but because Leon Spinks, after upsetting Ali, chose to give Ali a rematch instead of facing Norton. It was a direct opportunity snatched away. That belt, that moment, should have been his redemption. Instead, it became another bitter reminder that sometimes, in boxing, skill and effort just aren't enough. The emotional fallout was immediate and lasting. 2 times now, at the very edge of greatness, he had been denied by forces beyond his control. The disappointment seeped into every part of his life. Training camps lost their edge. His once razor-sharp conditioning slipped. The defensive genius who'd once made legends look ordinary started to look ordinary himself, struggling to find motivation for fights that no longer seemed to matter. Writers and fans noticed the change. The spark was fading. Young rarely complained publicly, but those closest to him saw a man who felt betrayed by the sport he'd given everything to. It wasn't just about pride or money. It was about purpose. When you've spent your whole life fighting for a shot at the top, and that shot keeps getting stolen by split decisions and politics, what's left to fight for? His resilience had always been his armor, but even the toughest armor cracks under enough pressure. The frustration and bitterness grew, and with it, a sense of hopelessness that couldn't be hidden behind a jab or a shoulder roll. The Norton fight marked a turning point. From that night on, Young's career followed a different path, a gradual downward spiral that even he couldn't reverse. That split decision loss would not only derail his shot at the title, but begin to fracture his spirit, something he'd never fully recover. And while the world saw a fighter slipping down the rankings, the real battle was happening far from the spotlight. The wounds left by those decisions didn't heal when the crowds went home. They lingered, shaping what came next. and making every day outside the ring feel like another round he couldn't win. For Young, the aftermath of boxing wasn't just about fading from the spotlight. The real cost showed up in everyday struggles, ones that no championship belt could fix. The unseen costs of his career, his health, his finances, and his battle with addiction began to surface in ways that were impossible to ignore. Financial trouble hit first. Despite fighting on big stages and earning purses that should have offered security, the money slipped away. He even lived without electricity at times because he simply forgot to pay his bills, a sign of his deepening cognitive decline. It wasn't just about bad investments or poor management. It was as if the routines that once kept his life together in training camps had vanished, leaving him unable to keep up with the basics. The city that once cheered for him now saw him as just another man struggling to get by. Yet the most devastating blows were the ones no one could see. Years of absorbing punishment in the ring left him with more than scars and memories. They left him with a damaged brain. Known then as dementia pugilistica, this slow-onset brain injury robbed him of memory and judgment years after the last bell. CTE doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, often a decade or more after the trauma, and for Jimmy, the signs were everywhere. He became forgetful, confused, and struggled with moods that swung from deep depression to bursts of anger. The same discipline that once defined him started to slip away. The real pain didn't come from the punches he took during his celebrated bouts against guys like Ali or Ken Norton. It came from the scars those punches left behind, invisible but impossible to escape. After he stepped out of the ring, the structure and discipline of his boxing career disappeared, and what was left was a life that turned into one long fight against his own deteriorating health, his financial woes, and his growing demons. But it wasn't just about money, and his decline wasn't just seen in private either. Young found himself arrested multiple times in the years after boxing, primarily for drug possession and public intoxication. Courtrooms became another kind of ring for him, with lawyers and judges stepping in to address the aftermath of his decline. During one such case, his attorney, Jeff Kilroy, openly stated that Young exhibited symptoms of chronic traumatic brain injury due to his time in the ring. For Kilroy, Jimmy's erratic behavior wasn't just criminal. It was the unintended outcome of a career spent absorbing punches in one of the world's most brutal sports. The condition crept in quietly, years after the cheers faded, stripping away his sharpness, his independence, and his ability to navigate the world. Friends and family watched as he drifted further from the man they remembered, his personality shifting in ways that only those closest to him could truly understand. Financially, things were just as bleak. At retirement, there were no pensions, no health care guarantees, just the fight to survive on what savings remained. The big paydays from the Ali and Norton fights were long gone. Emotionally, the weight was heavier still. Boxing had been Jimmy's identity, his ticket out of poverty, his reason to get up every morning. When that was gone, he was left with a void that nothing else could fill. The crowd's cheers were replaced by silence. The discipline and routine of training camps were replaced by confusion and loneliness. And then there's the self-medication, a term many retired fighters, especially of Jimmy's era, know all too well. Drugs and alcohol became both his escape and his crutch. Depression and anxiety tied to CTE are as debilitating as the physical symptoms, and he turned to substances to numb what he couldn't escape: the physical and psychological pain left behind by years in the ring. This wasn't about reckless partying or indulging bad habits. It was survival in the only way he thought he had left. Addiction made everything worse. It took whatever money he had left, strained relationships, and pulled him further from the help he needed. It's a vicious cycle. Pain leads to self-medication, which leads to more pain and more trouble. The city's jails and courtrooms became as familiar as the boxing gyms had once been. Each arrest was another sign that the system wasn't built to help men like Jimmy, who needed more than punishment. They needed understanding and support. Jimmy Young was living proof of the unseen costs of boxing, and he wasn't alone. The damage took his money, his health, and his sense of self. His story became a haunting reminder of what happens when a lifetime of fights catches up with you, and when boxing, as an industry, fails to catch its own. This suffering wasn't a one-off. It was part of a larger unspoken reality for fighters in his position. And tragically, his final chapter was no exception. His story was still building towards its ultimate tragedy, a conclusion that boxing, even after decades of broken fighters like him, has yet to reckon with. Jimmy Young passed away on February 20th, 2005, at just 56. The man who had once stood toe-to-toe with legends spent his final years in a state that few could have imagined when he was headlining arenas. For Jimmy and so many fighters like him, the end of a boxing career wasn't just retirement, it was a kind of exile. Substance abuse became a way to dull the pain, the confusion, and the sense of loss that came with no longer being a fighter. Alcohol and drugs weren't about chasing a high, they were about escaping a reality that felt smaller and more unforgiving every day. People did try to help. The Retired Boxers Foundation reached out, offering legal support and addiction counseling. Alex Ramos, a former fighter who'd battled his own demons, tried to show Jimmy there was a way back. He talked about the brotherhood of fighters, the shared pain, and the hope of recovery. But CTE robs you of more than memory. It takes away your ability to see a future for yourself. Ramos later admitted, "I knew we were going to lose him when I talked to him." There's a heartbreak in that confession, a sense that for all the brotherhood and outreach, some wounds just don't heal. He described Jimmy's last years with a kind of resigned sorrow. He wasn't no fool. He was a fighter, and he died fighting the battle that only he knew. That stubborn independence, the very quality that made him so tough in the ring, became a barrier outside of it. He resisted help, maybe out of pride, maybe because his mind wouldn't let him see how much he needed it. Ramos later admitted he knew they were going to lose Jimmy, as if the outcome was inevitable long before the final round. His life didn't end in a blaze of glory. It ended quietly, the result of years of punishment inside the ropes and neglect outside of them. He wasn't just another cautionary tale. He was living proof of what happens when the system fails to protect its own. His story lingers, not just as a memory of what he accomplished in the ring, but as a question mark hanging over the sport itself. Because when the final bell rings and the lights go out, the real fight is often just beginning. Boxing takes so much more than it gives, especially for fighters like Jimmy. His life reminds us the final bell doesn't mean the fight is over. And if the sport doesn't protect its athletes, how many more will pay the same heavy price? What do you think? How many more champions will be lost to the silence after the last bell? Let us know in the comments below. And if Jimmy's story moved you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to help us tell more fighters' hidden stories. See you in the next one.